Day 833 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So, starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 515,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,300 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, 22 tanks, 40 APVs, and a whopping 48 artillery. And as for a reminder on the percentages you see on the screen, they're a percentage based on the approximate levels of total Soviet stockpiles. That is to say, the percentage destroyed. And that's something important to note, because Russia has not yet been forced to fight a war on a production-based footing. Instead, they're fighting on half a century of military hardware stockpile build-ups. In fact, it's much more than half a century, given that we see T-62s and even T-55 tanks making themselves known on numerous occasions on the battlefield. But fighting a war based on 80-odd years of production material seems useful at first, but it's the most unsustainable practice you could ever see from a war. Thus, once the Soviet stockpiles are gone, then they have to build tanks, APVs, and artillery at the same attritional burn rates that they have for them now, which is impossible. So when Russia runs out of their old stocks, this leads to them firstly having to stop the meat waves, as it's just far too expensive from a production standpoint. Secondly, they have to be more careful in military engagements and mitigate risks for newly produced hardware, which means less offensives. In other words, upon running out, they have to change some of their very core doctrines of their military strategies, and yet they will not be able to turn on a dime. So, like I used to say quite some time ago now, is that Russia will continue to go hard until they have to go home. Then headed to the map and starting out in Russia today, as in the early hours of this morning, a series of blasts rocked the Novoshatinsk oil refinery in the Rostov Oblast. The blasts were swiftly followed by a massive fire that engulfed the facility, sending towering flames shooting up to the height of a 15-story building. The Rostov Oblast governor swiftly attributed the incident to a drone attack for what is the largest oil refinery in Russia's south. In the aftermath, a firefighting train was called in to assist in extinguishing the inferno, which had threatened to spiral out of control. And this wasn't even the first time that this refinery had been targeted by Ukrainian drones, and with an annual capacity of 5 million tons, this refinery was certainly dealing with some clear and present danger for this location, especially given that it's so close to Ukraine. Now, on the first strike, back in March, military intelligence announced that the facility had been partially shut down due to a similar attack, marking an escalation in the campaign to degrade Russia's oil infrastructure and disrupting Moscow's ability to sustain its war efforts. Then briefly looking counterclockwise on the map still within Russia, as it was noted that a Russian Kh-101 cruise missile fell in the Volgograd region. Then, in a similar fashion, just next door in Belgorod, Russian air defenses had reportedly shot down its own reconnaissance UAV Orlan-30 drone. And although I cannot yet fully confirm this statement as current, Russia has shot down much worse of its own, including various aircraft such as Su-35 jets, Su-25s, and yes, I mean plural form, and even a helicopter somewhat recently. Now, Putin has previously stated that such things are impossible due to a friend or foe system installed, but what does he know? And I don't say that as some backhanded comment, but what does he actually know? He knows what the military tells him. But the inherent systemic flaws of the Russian autocratic regime is such that there's always a fear of punishment for poor performance or bad reports. So the solution for the military or the manufacturers or both is to overstate their capabilities, no harm, no fuss, rosy reports. So this way of governance may likely attribute heavily to the country's downfall when the history books are written. Then headed into Ukraine, into the northern sector, where the changing dynamics are playing out in real time. For instance, it's certainly likely that it's no coincidence that Russia's guided aerial munition barrages were immediately cut in half on the day Ukraine received permission to strike Russian soil with Western weapons just 5 or 6 days ago. And this permission was granted for a limited section of the front, highlighting the potential impact if it were extended to all areas. In fact, also, Kharkiv is experiencing quite the reprieve from the daily Russian strikes because Ukraine can now target missile launches in Belgorod. However, to put a much larger stop to the strikes in the north, and not just for Kharkiv, it's necessary to strike at launches in Kursk and Bryansk, those regions as well. So that will likely come to pass given the Pandora's box that Russia has opened up from the recent commencement of their incursions right here in the north. Oh, and more specifically, an observation from Kharkiv from a few nights ago revealed that it was the first night in months without Russian S-300 missiles striking the city or surrounding areas. So it's astonishing how effective destroying launches in Russian territory is compared to intercepting missiles when they enter Ukrainian airspace. Or not so astonishing at all, really. Then headed just southeast of here on the map as the battlefield north of Kupiansk has seen renewed surges of Russian activity or offensives in the recent days. And after numerous failed attempts to capture the village of Sinkivka, Russian forces have seemingly regrouped and reignited their push eastward towards the strategic location. Despite the high costs and setbacks previously suffered in this sector, Moscow appears undeterred, once again committing troops and resources to an advance in the settlement. But it's not just Sinkivka, because renewed efforts by Russian forces have occurred all the way down this entire region, which is truly a combination of Kharkiv, Luhansk, and Donetsk. With limited changes on the map, but Russia is actively doubling down on so many locations on the entire eastern front of the Donbass, expending so many resources even down near Vuhledar. It's almost as if they decided on a renewed pitch to try and take the rest of the Donbass again, and coincidentally, Russia has just got a new Minister of Defense, Belousov, the former Economic Development Minister of Russia. That's right, folks, not exactly a meritocracy over there. And so perhaps Belousov thought to try his hand at an entire region that so many others have failed to succeed with before. Oh, and just to make it clear, crystal clear on his credentials, Belousov does not have a military background whatsoever. He's an economist by training. As such, this guy is forced into on-the-job training for a top military position within Russia, and not just a top position, but the top position, apart from getting completely micromanaged by Putin, which ultimately leads to a case of the blind leading the blind. I'm just surprised that this situation doesn't get not nearly enough press. Then, taking a look around on the map as somewhere in the east, a Ukrainian FPV drone seems to make contact with a Russian BMD vehicle. Outcome unknown, but probably wasn't great. Then also, we saw an FPV destroy a UR-77 mine-clearing vehicle of Russia's. So it's an old Soviet design operated by both Russia and Ukrainian armies. Though I've never been a big fan of them because, well, starting off, the way that they work firstly is such that the UR-77 uses a rocket-propelled line charge that, when detonated, can clear a path through minefields clearly and effectively, and clear a corridor up to 6 meters wide and 90 meters long, allowing safe passage for infantry and vehicles. So true to say, it is an effective and proven technology, but only works for those short distances and is slow to reload and uses a massive amount of detonation charges. But in the end, Russia has been pulling out all of the mine clearing equipment to levels I've not seen before. But by the very same token, we're also seeing Russian mine clearers get destroyed at levels we've not seen before. Now, they often say correlation does not mean causation, but I think we can make a small leap of faith here. Then, also in the east, the strange case of a Russian turtle tank just acting like an inanimate stationary turtle for quite some time, thus leaving itself wide open to compromise. Destroyed. Then, also in the east, we saw a destroyed Russian TOS-1A 220mm MLRS somewhere at the front lines, and the rarity with which we see these thermobaric rocket launchers destroyed now is completely in line with the very few expected volumes that Russia was ever known to have produced, anywhere between 50 and 100. And these platforms, they really don't have a place in this war due to their lack of armor and their minuscule 6-kilometer or about 3.8 mile range. Then in the Luhansk region, another Tor air defense system was hit by paratroopers of the 95th Separate Air Assault Brigade, although in this case there appears to be a bit of bad luck for the Ukrainian FPV drone and its operator, as it did impact but the Tor managed to drive away after it was struck. Although I'd venture a guess to say that this Tor air defense system received more than enough damage to put it out of service for at least a while. Then headed all the way down to Crimea because according to the latest reports from the attached partisan movement, Russia has been amassing military equipment and personnel in occupied Crimea with an increase in combat aircraft activity. Now, the previously abandoned airport in Simferopol is now used solely for military purposes, and now due to fears of drone attacks, Russian forces are scrambling military aircraft into the air throughout the day, so really keeping them on their toes. And so the number of Russian troops and military equipment at the airport has surged, according to the attached partisans, with their regular monitoring and transmitting of vital information back to Ukraine. But despite Russia's sincerest efforts, the partisans assert that their resistance cannot be effectively thwarted. And very interestingly, they also advise that a Russian R-330 automated electronic suppression system has been monitored moving through the Russian-occupied Jankoy region of the Crimean Peninsula in its travels to reach its final battlefront destination of the mainland of Ukraine. But the attached partisans are extremely confident these systems will not reach their destination, stating, quote, "Nothing will reach the mainland of Ukraine this time. The salute will be very beautiful," end quote. So, needless to say, these guys are somewhat quite well known for sabotage against the Russian military. Then headed across to some news for today. So the Ukrainian Air Force has received Gepard self-propelled anti-aircraft systems that the United States purchased from Jordan, with photos of these systems getting published on the official Facebook page of the Ukrainian Air Force. So these Gepard systems feature an upgraded fire control system and more modern radar systems. Originally supplied to the Netherlands Armed Forces in 1977, these anti-aircraft systems were initially part of a contract with distinct modifications. These Dutch Gepards were equipped with a different radar part and a smokescreen system. And now some of these Gepard systems are deployed as part of the air defense forces of the Air Command West, targeting Russian UAVs and cruise missiles. Now, quite impressively, these Gepards are part of a larger package of 60 upgraded units received from the US, who purchased them from Jordan some time ago, which is an absolute mammoth figure given that Ukraine only had about 40 of these units before the now inflowing 60 Jordanian units. So this is actually quite the incredible number that cannot be understated for these significantly cheaper to run air defense systems with their twin 35mm cannons, which are highly effective, so it turns out, against low-flying aircraft and drones in particular, making them a valuable asset in protecting Ukrainian skies from Russian aerial threats. Then in some more news, Western-provided artillery ammunition has reportedly started arriving to Ukrainian forces on the front line, although not in quantities sufficient to challenge Russia's current artillery shell advantage of about 5-1. Bearing in mind it never needs to be 1-1, so far as Ukraine is concerned, because Ukrainian artillerists, for a variety of reasons, are incredibly more precise than their Russian counterparts. So as it all trickles through, slowly ramping out to more ideal supply levels, the Institute of the Study of War assesses that Russian forces are seeking to make significant tactical and operational gains before sufficient levels of artillery assistance reaches the front lines in meaningful enough quantities for the AFU. So it appears Russia may perceive this as a race to the clock, where they're threatened with an existential crisis on the battlefields, So they feel the need to continue to fan the flames of their attritional meat grinder tactics to make all gains possible while they still feel that they can, right at this juncture of the war. Then headed across to a quick funny to round it all off today, guys. So, the world's second army and their efficient logistics. As this motorbike was employed for the delivery of 2 120mm mortar rounds to the front lines by Russian soldiers. And yet, they're fearless in the face of any mishandling, collision, or accident that can potentially cause detonation. Now, yes, the fuses would need to be set, but there is still significant risks associated with transporting mortar rounds on a bike that's likely to be getting targeted. And speaking of transporting, I haven't exactly said it yet, but this is inefficient and impractical for some of the most obvious reasons, not even worth dignifying a response for. I mean, I am just beside myself with the inefficiencies here. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like and comment. I do see it and appreciate it all. And thanks as well for the support, for the coffees, the super thanks, and of course as well, the Patreon supporters. I can't do it without each and every one of you guys. It really does help to keep things going. So thanks again, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!